Welcome back to Beyond the Helmet. I'm your host, Steve McGrath, and today I hope you're ready to kick some glass because my guest is none other than Dr. Jen Welter. Now, Coach Welter broke the barrier, being the first woman coach in the NFL back in 2015 with the Arizona Cardinals. Now, all my guests to this point have been men because it's a male-dominated sport, so I had to talk to the first woman who was able to kick down that door, become the first coach, and learn what her journey was like to get there. And of course, she does have a PhD to her name, so she knows a thing or two about how the brain works. So without any further ado, here is Jen Welter in her story of shattering barriers. Absolute pleasure to be joined by none other than the barrier-breaking Dr. Jen Welter, better known as Coach Welter. Jen, how are you doing today?
I am good. Let me introduce you to my sidekick. You know, if superheroes have sidekicks, mine is Tyson. And he definitely gets his mindset from his mom, right? He doesn't realize he's not big, and neither do I. So, you know, he will conquer the world one ankle at a time.
Well, I mean, you are living proof that size does not matter. It's all about the size of the fight in the dog, not the dog in the fight.
Without a doubt. And that's why I say he's like my totem. You know, if witches have cats, Coach Jen has a Chihuahua. It's just, it is. And once upon a time, I actually had German Shepherds. And Tyson was a rescue. And I did not think I liked small dogs, which tells you so much about me, right? Like I saw myself as a German Shepherd. And this dog came in and just, you know, just won my heart, and he's been with me ever since. So I think, I always say there's such an honesty with like dogs and kids, right? They see right to the core of you and hopefully have the ability to bring the best out of us. With the ones who love us unconditionally, right? Yeah.
And as a small dog owner myself, the toy poodle quickly became the alpha over everyone between the golden retrievers that I have, my in-laws have. So there's something special to them.
There really is. I'm telling you, there were times when I would look over and Tyson would be laying over the German Shepherds, like, and just have his little paws crossed in front like this. Like, I own this. And then, at times they kind of look at me like, Mom, does he realize we could eat him? Did you realize? No, I don't think he does. But it tells us a lot about mentality, right?
Absolutely. What you just said, I feel like sums up most of your professional football life. I mean, you're so consistent with every time you've been talking in the media about your story. And one of those themes is 5'2", 130 pounds. You're told over and over again from the time you're a little girl, you're not going to be big enough to play professional tennis. You're not going to be able to cut it as a football player. How does and I want to talk about breaking down glass barriers, but just from a young age, being told that something physically will hold you back and you'll never be able to do something you love, you didn't shut it down. You just kept fighting and finding a way to chase your dream or chase something anyway. You weren't going to be told no. From an early age, how did you have that mindset of, I will overcome this, I will get around this, I'll find another way?
I think it's a really important thing to teach kids about, because a lot of the times kids imagine that, the quote unquote great ones were always the great ones, right? Like it's like they must have, come out of the womb and been like born with a like, LeBron James must have had like a basketball in his hand, right? And the truth is, and even research will back this up, that a lot of the time kids that grow early, right, and are used to being just physically dominant, if when that goes away from the kids who have had to work harder to keep up, sometimes they don't bridge the gap. So for any of the kids that are listening out there, or the parents who might have an impact on them, it's really important to give your kids the power to focus on what is in their control. What is in their control to change? Okay, I'm 5'2". Doesn't matter what I did, I was not going to be 6'10". In my mind, I'm 6'10", but I can't control my height. That is not something that I can change. what can I change? My speed, I can change my agility, I can develop strength. So the focus that we put into kids' minds on where they can get better and what they can always control, I think that's what becomes so powerful. And so for me, I couldn't control if I was going to be tall or short. But what I could do is go in and put in the work, for example, like in the gym, lifting weights and doing stuff like that, so that strength wouldn't be a challenge of mine, right? And it could actually become one of my advantages. And then even when I was in football, it was like when I first got there, I had this idea of what a football player was. And first of all, the idea was, it was kind of universal, which is a disservice to football, right? Like in football, we need every make, model, shape, size, creed, color, everything from straight muscle to straight hustle working together to be successful. So I didn't have to be, the biggest, but I could, be one of the smallest and quickest and one of the ones with best leverage. So that I think is a really powerful lesson that applies in so many ways and certainly has in my life, right? We focus on what we can control, the things that we can develop. It's kind of like it's the you versus you, right? And this is something that I think is really important, especially now during COVID when it feels like, the world is weird, because it is, right? And there are so many things that are stacked against us. But the thing that we can control is what we do every day, right? It's me versus me, right? If I have agility ladder drills to do, I can do those. It has nothing to do with anybody else. And if I am my competition, I can always improve.
There you go. I mean, I think it's easy to say control what you can control when it's a physical thing, right? When it's sort of like, I know I can do the agility. I know I can get into the weight room, but the mental part is just a little bit tougher. And I mean, you addressed it, incredibly well there about, not really allowing someone to put you in a box. But as you get into playing, in case anyone didn't know, I mean, A, just Google you to watch the highlights. I mean, you were fearless out there, but B, I mean, that aside, you work yourself into being a Pro Bowl player. Your team's winning championships. I mean, and this is before you get to Team USA and you're ultimately winning gold medals. But before you even have a chance to play football, how did you navigate the space of there's a sport that I really like, I can't get there, I don't see a road to get there? I mean, obviously the dream comes full circle for you to be able to get out there and play, but how do you just get in the right mindset of I will accept other sports or other avenues so I can at least enjoy myself?
I think part of that for me was that it really wasn't a possibility. It was it was a lesson that I learned early, right? Like, so okay, so football is a place that girls don't go. But that wasn't the only thing that interested me. And so I really did find other sports that I loved, and also an affinity for defining that I was going to be strong, right? Like, so that was something that was important to me. And, as a 14-year-old girl, like I'm in the weight room and there weren't other girls really in the weight room at that time at my age, right? That was early. Thankfully, now that is not the case with girls anymore. They're getting into the weight room much earlier and getting much better athletic development and training. But I really kind of was like, I don't want to be this, tiny little scrawny discounted thing. And that's what I was, right? Like, I mean, I was, I was like a little stick figure, and, sub 5 foot. So it's not surprising that, a tennis coach looked at me and it's like, there's no way that you could be one of the best, right? Like, and so what I could define is what I put in. And I also found that team sports was really good medicine for me, because I was so relentless, and I did have my Chihuahua mentality, but in a team sport, I didn't have to be all of the answers by myself like I did in tennis, for example. So I could be a really good teammate. And I kind of had this energy that made other people play up around me, right? So I found my place in team sports, and then later found my way to the sport that I had always imagined having a place in, right? But it wasn't like when I wanted to play that every other girl was getting to play and I wasn't, right? And I think that's a little bit what's different. Now thankfully it's not quite the same, right? There are more opportunities for girls and women to play football. So then it becomes a choice, and something that is more controllable. But back then, there weren't any girls playing.
No, of course. So, as I alluded to, you do very well on the field when you finally get a chance to be out there. And this is after you've built that mental muscle of how to be a good teammate, what your strengths and weaknesses were, understanding that you have a piece to play in that bigger puzzle. So and I know I'm fast forwarding a little bit here, but by the time that, 2014 rolls around and you really start to become transcendent in the game, what was your initial reaction to even just the idea of playing on a football team of everyone else being a man?
Well, so what's really funny is I had people throughout my career say, you've been playing football for so long, done so many great things in the game. Like, what are you trying to do, play in the NFL? And I would be like, no, like I would never do that. I am not crazy. I am 5'2", 130 pounds. I would never play football against men. And I lovingly say that, God has a good sense of humor or doesn't like the word never, because I didn't set out to do it. I actually got a call after the 2013 U.S. national team. We won our second gold medal. And then my team at the time, the Dallas Diamonds, folded. One of the dynasties of women's football. We had won 4 championships, multiple championship appearances, and all of a sudden, here this legacy that we'd all been a part of. I was part of that team for 10 years. And we had a swag that was like off the charts, right? We knew that other teams were like, oh, not the Diamonds, right? And then the Diamonds are gone. And I think we were all heartbroken and lost, and we didn't know what was going to come next. And I get this call from a team called the Texas Revolution, which is an indoor football league team. It was at that point, the general manager and part owner was Tim Brown. I mean, it was, in terms of indoor teams, pretty well known. And, they wanted to meet with me. And I really didn't know what they wanted, but I was like, you know what? I remember thinking, like, I'm going to wear really tall shoes when I go into this meeting. So I will be at least 5'4" when I walk in that door. And I went in, and the energy was so weird in this meeting. I already had my PhD in psychology, so I'm like a student of the game within the game. And, it was like the coach was drawing in his non-existent. I didn't make eye contact with him. I wasn't really there. And yet the owner of the team and the president was really excited. Jen Welter, so great to meet with you, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, what's going on here, right? And he was like, we think it would be amazing if you would go through a day of training camp with our guys. And I was like, oh, so you want me to go in and, catch a few passes, run some ladder drills, smile for the camera, get you guys some good pop. And he was like, yeah, I think it'd be amazing. And I was like, absolutely not. So as someone who just won her second gold medal, that's an insult. And if I was any one of your guys on your team, I would absolutely hate it. If you want to do anything and your football team, either I do everything step for step, hit for hit, or I do nothing at all. And as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I was like, oh, that's going to happen, right? Like, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was going to play pro football against men, and I might have also gotten myself killed. It was not like I had these delusions of grandeur, but what I knew is that I wasn't going to let them use me to, just be their publicity stunt.
Yeah, you're not a gimmick.
Yeah, and in that moment, what was so interesting is like, Coach Dub went from, the non-existent playbook to kind of looking up at me, and he was like, he was impressed. And it was that shift that really mattered to him. Um, and then obviously it went from, not only being a day of training camp, but through the entire season. And it was one of the most important things I ever did in my life. And I knew that I might have gotten myself killed. I knew that, the risk of having a career ending injury was very high. I mean, football is always high, but most people are not high enough to think that they can do it at 5'2", right? Like, I must have been on some good stuff that day, because it was a very risky proposition, and yet I didn't know any other way to do it, right? Like, I didn't really feel like there was another option. We had in football been trying for so long, right, to change the game, to really like make the case that women belonged in the game. And I remember thinking as a player, if I could just make one more tackle, if I could just make one more sack, if I could just, be a little better in this game, right? If my technique was just a little better, if, I could make other plays, if I could get a little faster, that maybe I would tackle the perception that, girls don't belong out here, and that somebody would say, yeah, you know what, they can really ball. And it never happened. 2 gold medals, 4 championships, Pro Bowls, all that stuff. It never happened. And yet, all of a sudden, once I was willing to literally step out on the same field, play the same game, and get hit by men, all of the sudden, right, it was the #1 story in the country. And everyone wanted to know how it happened, right? Like, who is this woman who thinks she can play against men? And it really changed the perception and opened minds and opened the conversation to girls and women in football, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I mean, it begs the. So one detail you skipped over there. I mean, how good was the stuff that you were on that day? You said yes. I'll switch from defense to offense. I mean, so can we talk a little bit about? And again, go to YouTube. There is images of you going through a practice, and like you are getting hit like any other player. I mean, when coach said you're gonna do every drill, you're not gonna dodge a hit. You
Yep.
did it. So what? How did your body hold up to like actually getting hit now by I'd imagine the strength and just velocity of these people are much greater than the impacts you're used to taking.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's always funny, like when you tell stories and you recount things. There's so much. And yes, Coach Dub said you're not going to play defense. You're going to play running back, which I remember responding to him and saying, that's exactly opposite of everything that I'm good at. And I might be more scared of playing offense than I am of playing against guys, right? Because at least in defense, I knew where I was good. And in this, it was not the case, but he really thought that my size and speed would be an advantage at running back. Yeah, I know. I looked at him that way too. I was like, is he crazy? But it was one of those things where he said, this is the only way we can do it. And I was like, well, you're the coach, it's your team, right? And especially in training camp early, it was rough. And I remember being that person in women's football, right? Like, I was an enforcer, and it was like, oh, you think you're going to come into our game? Well, don't expect to have this easy, right? Like, if you want to do this, you're going to have to really be one of us. And here I was out on their field and still wearing a Dallas Diamonds helmet, right? So I'm wearing a women's football helmet, and obviously the smallest by far, so an easy target. And some people were like, oh my gosh, the guys were so hard on you. Like, no, actually, they were the same on me. And that's what's important. Like, football is not an easy game. So what are they going to do? Sidestep it? That doesn't work. And what they really needed to see is that I would take all of those hits, get back up and say, I can do better, right? Like, I'm going to do more, because some of it was also new, which makes it more difficult, right? Like, I, wasn't a running back. So a lot of it was very new. And yet, them knowing that, that's also where I earned a lot of respect. My body holding up, well, it hurt a lot. But football traditionally hurts a lot. So, I was definitely, I think, in peak physical condition, thankfully, and also, very much a football person. But I'm definitely not going to say that it didn't hurt. I do like to say, though, that at being 5'2", one of the advantages of it is that I do bounce well, and I'm hard to get a clean hit on, I think. So sometimes, that becomes an advantage, because someone who is bigger is also a bigger target. But I don't think it spared me enough, but I do think it kept me from having some kind of an injury that I couldn't recover from.
Talk about something that was called a disadvantage for most of your life becoming your biggest advantage when it really mattered the most, when the most was on the line. Could you have ever imagined jumping over into then coaching that team the following year if you had not earned their respect for that year of just sticking it out day in, day out?
No. And I, full disclosure, never imagined that I would be a coach. I wasn't that player, right? Like, I was the wild card. I was the, one of the enforcers. I was the, crazy, just go sack the quarterback. I wasn't the captain and the, get everyone in line. Like, I would help anybody if they wanted me to help them, but I always felt like I had more work to do, right? And that was really the thing about it, is like, I was such a competitor with myself. Like, I always felt like I had more to learn. So I wasn't necessarily one who was going to be like, oh, you should have done this. I would help anybody who asked me, but, I never had this like delusion that I was that much better than everybody else. And so it wasn't really my personality to be like, hey, you need to do this. But on that team, I was on practice squad a lot of the time. And notoriously in indoor football, there's not also that many coaches. So, my heart's on defense. That's where I'm better. It's no secret. And when I was on practice squad, I might see something. I'd be like, hey, they're trying to do this. Next time, do this. And the guys would instinctively say, like, dude, Jen, you're like our little coach on the sidelines, right? And I'd be like, yes. And I get to take this right here and finally put it in that big body that I always like imagined in my head was there, right? Like, it was kind of cool. It was like a puppet master, right? Like, I get to take what I learned at 5'2" and put it in this big giant 6'4" body. This is so cool, right? And oh, sorry, Tyson's coming back. Ah, sorry, the dog rules the house. Sorry, guys. And so, not only did I earn their respect as a teammate and also as being really knowledgeable and tough in the game, but we developed great relationships. And, me playing on that team, like Clinton Solomon's a good friend of mine still to this day, former Chicago Bear who played on that team. And he was really my advocate from day one. He was number one and wore the number one receiver. Like, he was that guy, right? Like, that charismatic, game-changing wide receiver, and also game-changing in my corner. And we talked the other day, and I said, Solo, I was just thinking about everything, and I just wanted to thank you for always having my back. And he goes, Jen, he's like, you changed all of us on the team that year. He's like, you made us all better. I still have people who ask me, they're like, Revolution, isn't that the team that had a girl? And he's like, I have to tell him, it's like not a girl, it's the girl. because not everybody could do what you did. And so the relationships that we formed through that, and seeing what we thought was impossible, and yes, it making those guys play harder for me than maybe if I wasn't on that team, or the intense freaking protective nature that it brought out of them when guys would talk smack to me or whatever. um, that's what caught the attention of Wendell Davis, who was the new head coach that came in the following season. And Wendell, after sitting me down and grilling me about football and all of that, the next day called me and said, "You have to coach my football team." And I said, "No." And he was like, "What do you mean, no?" I was like, no, girls don't coach football. I don't, and you can't just throw me right into men's pro football. Like, I'm not going to do it. And Wendell said, "Not a lot of guys are going to give you this opportunity. You're taking this job." And again, I was like, "No." And he called me back the next day and told me about myself. He said, "Do you remember how I said not a lot of guys were going to give you this opportunity? You're taking this job?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Good. I took it for you. You're coaching for me. And by the way, you can't quit. Otherwise, the entire narrative surrounding women coaching and men's pro football will be, we had a girl once and she quit." And I was like, okay. Like, boy, oh boy, did this guy have my number, because though I might not have felt confident enough to step up into the challenge, I also certainly did not have it in me to quit. So he kind of saw that in me before I saw it in myself. And, you know, and then thankfully the guys, they really did respond well. And the credibility of having played on that field was second to none. And it was the same way going into the Cardinals. Like, the guys all knew that. And, and that, I think, impressed them probably more than the whole first female coach in the NFL. The fact that I played men's pro football, they were like, "Yeah, I've had bad coaches. So the whole coaching thing, maybe yes, no, but you played against the dudes," right? Like, they were like, that's the whole nother level. And so, it's just interesting.
Yeah. And by the way, leadership 101, understanding how to push the right buttons on the right people. I mean, boy, again, maybe he knew more than you could see at that time, but the fact that he was able to get you to do what he thought was best for you, I mean, that's how you get it done right there. And
Yep.
I know that you do such a great job of outlining really how everything comes together in Arizona at the press conference where they introduce you. So just in the entrance of time, because I know that we could go down that rabbit, at least I could go down that rabbit hole forever. I just want to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of when you're there in Arizona. How much do you have to, because you coach for 1 year. So just to get used to being on that side of it full time, you're now on the biggest stage being asked, to do it and fit in and feel, not like an imposter, which anyone with 1 year under their belt, I would imagine, could feel. So how did you get in the best mindset for you to be able to hit that as hard as you possibly could?
There were a couple of things, and I'm going to give a lot of credit to some people who really had significant moments in helping me accept me. And that was first Terry Glenn, whose advice going in was to be 100% authentic. He said, "If you are the same person with those guys every day that you were here with us, they will absolutely love you. But if you're fake in any way, they will sense it and eat you alive." So at every moment when I might not have known what to do or felt confident or is this the right thing, I just kind of heard TG in my head and I was like, okay, be authentic, right? Like, I can't coach I can't coach the same way that they do. I'm not coming with the same stuff, but I can also be a help to this team through my vantage point. And so that was one part. The other part for me was, I had a lot of people ask, like, how did you command the guys' respect? when you were with the Cardinals, and I would just laugh. I'm like, really? First of all, the fact that you said command is problem number one, right? Like, you don't command respect, you earn respect. And for me, it was, I can't go in thinking that I know everything because I don't. But what I can do is know what I know and be very coachable. So I listened a lot and looked for the opportunities where I could add value, both in terms of interpersonal stuff and football stuff, right? Because I do have a doctorate of psychology. And Daryl Drake, who unfortunately we lost earlier this year, he was a receivers coach with me in the Cardinals and then was with the Steelers. Drake really impressed me on I think it was my first day there, going around to like meet the other coaches. And Drake was like, "Coach, come in here, have a seat. Heard you have a doctorate in psychology." Straight up. And I was like, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "That's the most important thing you bring to this team." He said, "We have a coach on here. He coached in Super Bowl I." And I was like, "Oh, wow." And he's like, "Yep. So they're going to be people who know more X's and O's than you." Right? Well, straight up honest, like, he's been coaching longer than I've been alive. So yes, he has literally forgotten more about football than, I've even possibly been exposed to. He said, "But no one else on this staff has a PhD in psychology." And let me tell you a little story, because Drake had a master's, and he said, "I used to coach for the Chicago Bears. And one of the most talented wide receivers I had was Brandon Marshall." And that's when I realized that, coaching football isn't just coaching players. It's mentoring men. And, it's really understanding them. And he goes, "You have that unique ability. So as much as you might feel like you're undergunned in certain ways," he was like, "Don't lose that and realize that what you have is special." And I was like, "Okay." Right. And Drake was that guy. He always had like the side hustle. Right. I'm gonna get emotional because I love Drake. He always said he always said he was gonna bring me back to one of the staffs that he was on. So losing him was just like, it was like tragic, because you always hoped you'd be back with that person. But he was that guy who always had the side hustle, right? He'd be like, "Oh, you need t-shirts? I got t-shirts," right? He'd be like, like, he had the extra hustle out of the trunk, except his was on human capital, right? Like, he'd be like, "Hey, this person's really good at this. You need to know this person. You need to do here." And he really helped teach me about the game within the game. Like, he, before one game, before our first game, when it feels so long, like there's so much time for coaches, like we're waiting on the players. And he had said, he's like, "Do you know what we coaches do before games?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "It feels really long, doesn't it?" And I was like, "Yes." And he goes, "We meet other coaches, because this business is not for long, and you need to meet guys on the other sidelines, because you never know who's going to be in a position to hire." And he was like, "As a matter of fact, that guy right there, Brad Childress, Chili's a good guy. Chili be a head coach again one day. He might be able to hire you. Honey, let's go meet him." And he walks me over to Brad Childress, and interestingly enough, Chili did hire me when he became the head coach of the Atlanta Legends. So that was Drake, and he did a really good job of kind of preparing me for the fact that what I had in terms of the psychological understanding of players could be paired with any of the other coaches in other positions, and be uniquely valuable to the team. And then I had, like, the best mentor that you could ever ask for in such a tough situation was Larry Foote. And, Footy was a great player in and of himself. He was a, first year coach at that point, which is why BA put us together, because he thought we'd be good together. And, Footy's straight Detroit. He doesn't pull any punches. He is straight up honest. You always know what you stand. And he's not one of those guys who's going to be like, "Stand back and just let me do everything," right? Like, he threw me right in the mix, right up front on everything. And I impressed him on my attention to detail on like one-on-one, especially with regards to fundamentals. And he loved it because he's like, then he got to play, kind of chess master and look at the big picture and let me adjust like the small things, which took him out of the weeds. And he was like, that's perfect for me because I get to watch all this and you deal with that. Right. And so he was really good at being a good teammate and never put me in a position where I think that I was looked at as less than, and I think that that's one of the things that can be hard on a staff is like, players are going to respond to how you treat people. And the fact that those guys treated me just the same as anyone else, and yet actually would integrate me in ways where I was uniquely valuable, also sent a message to players. Like Amos, our special teams coach, used to use me as the rabbit all the time. Like, oh man, Coach Jane, you so fast, and I always know where you are. I'll know if those guys took the right angle to you or not, right? So I'd be out there, running and positioning as if I was the kick returner, because he could look and see that they were gravitating to the right person. He was like, can't miss that ponytail, so coach, you're the rabbit and you're out there. And the other players loved it too because they knew I was a baller, right? And it wasn't like, oh, you can't do that. Like, and so I think it was just a special mix. So yes, for me, I think I did a good job, but I was also in a good position surrounded by great people. And that's a big part of it. Like you don't do things like that by yourself being good. You hopefully are a good part of a great system and plan and group of people who then allow you to be unique, special, and add value, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I always say. It's not about being better or worse than another coach. That's why you have a staff, right? This isn't a competition. This is, can we be better as a unit together than we were if, one of these parts wasn't here?
Very similar to your spot on the team when you're playing. Everyone has their own advantages, what they bring to the table, what they don't. And it sounds like this was just a perfect situation for you to find your niche yet again. So I feel like I'd be remiss to ask they talk about toxic masculinity and how bad a locker room culture could be. Is there a percent of guys that just like flat out rejected you being there no matter what you did? And without naming names or anything, like based off your entire experience being in this field, I mean, how close to 100% were you at winning everyone over?
So I don't know if anybody's ever 100%, right? Like we're always going to have coaches and athletes that mesh better together than
Oh,
others,
sure.
right? And part of that is even the guys that you work with, right? Like, I mean, there are probably some guys on the offense. We might have been best friends. We might have been worst enemies, but I don't really know because we're not in the same locker room, right? So you have to look at who you interact with the most and what those interactions are like. And I never had anyone be outwardly negative to me. Not anyone. I can go 100% across the Cardinals board and say none of them were ever like, ugh, I hate her, get out of my face. Like there was never that bad, awkward moment. I think some people are slower to adopt maybe, but that could be their nature or somebody different, right? I remember there were certain players who were out front and very supportive. And part of this is credit to Bruce Arians. One of the really special things that BA did, which I actually didn't know until I wrote my book, is when he was confident that he wanted to make this decision and bring me in, was after he went to the players in the locker room, the leaders in the locker room. I still don't know which ones. I have my suspicions, but he asked them if they would be behind it. And when he had the buy-in from the players, then he moved it, up the flagpole, if you said. But the first thing that he did was get the buy-in from the players. So they had a lot of ownership in this decision. And I think that made it really special to them. The guys were really excited to be a part of history, and to do something different in football. So we had a phenomenal atmosphere. I've never had the player pushback that most people thought. Um, some of the guys were more out front, like, oh my gosh, the coolest thing in the world. And others, it might have taken a little bit longer, but never did I have any of the like, oh no, da 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 da. Right. I think I went through more of that when I was in arena, especially when I was playing. And then I've also had, unfortunately, the harder part, I think, in terms of that is, older people in the sport. Not the guys, not the younger ones, but in some other situations, not with the Cardinals, some of the coaches still don't necessarily believe that women belong. So whether it's the way it's always been kind of mentality, I think that's a harder thing than the players. The players, I've never had problems with. In fact, in some of the toughest situations I've been in, the players have been proactive on my behalf, protective, and like, you are our coach, and like, that's not going to be okay. So I know
Yeah.
people talk about toxic masculinity, and yet for me, the locker room has been one of the places where I've found the most understanding, the most support, and yes, masculinity, but not in a toxic way, more in a like, I almost say like I have uh, this special place in the brotherhood where I have like a whole lot of younger big brothers and a whole lot of big brothers, right? Like they're all bigger than me. They just may be younger or older, I guess.
That's awesome. But a whirlwind of 2 or 3 year span from the time you start playing to coaching. By 2016, what do you do next? You just made it to the highest high. Like as a competitor, your entire life. How do you now find a new high? You just took it to the limit. How do you sort of say, okay, what's next?
I think that's one of the like there's like this success cliff, right? Like you kind of walk off, it's like you just did something big and everyone's like, okay, what's next? And you're like, whoa. And for me, I wasn't quite sure what was next. I had the opportunity in 2016 to launch NFL Play 6 in Canada, which was really cool. I got to do this whole tour, and it really opened up my mind to the importance of being a role model and of giving girls a visible and tangible person that they could relate to. So that really impacted me. And then going into 2017, so in 2016, I had an opportunity to, the 2017 Women's World Championship was happening. And I had the opportunity to play on Team USA. And there was a lot of pressure for that. But then I also had an offer to be the head coach for the Australian women's national team. And that was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, because it's more fun to play. Like, of course I want to go out and play again and be able to win like a third gold medal and like spend time with my sisters and really just be able to go back to being a ball player. And yet one of my good friends, Odessa Jenkins, had wanted to be the head coach of the U.S. national team. And she was basically told, like, no, we already have these guys in place, maybe 2021. And I remember when OJ told me that, and she was upset. And I said, well, you just made the decision for me. And she's like, what do you mean? And I was like, it's probably going to be really unpopular, but I'm going to say no to Team USA, and I'm going to take the head coach job of Team Australia, because we need to set the precedent. right? There needs to be a precedent set that a female could be a head coach, because hopefully in 2021, when you want that job, they won't have a reason to tell you no. And so um, I I got to take that opportunity. I did it partially because I also knew I was going to take it with two of the best coaches that I knew. My Team USA offensive and defensive coordinator from 2010, John Konecki and Anthony Stone, and both of them were 100% behind the need to have to take Team Australia by storm, help set the precedent of what the game could look like in Australia. And they really wanted me to be the head coach so that I had to deal with all the politics and they could just focus on football, which was really funny because they're both Chicago guys and they're like, we're really good at football, but Welter, we need you to do all that other stuff. And I was like, oh, you're sacrificial lamb, huh? Right. But it was really cool because I knew how good they were and I knew what we could accomplish by taking that. So it was like this huge adventure to be able to go to Australia and, help change the culture surrounding gridiron, as they call it in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize because I know we're running a little late on time, but I want to try to wrap this up as best I can by again echoing what I've seen from you, which is consistency in everything that you've said and done since the time they introduced you at the press conference. I mean, everything I've seen you say in an interview is, I was the first, but I will not be the last. So you very early adopted the mindset of like, okay, now that I kicked right through this glass barrier, let's make sure that the floodgates are open and there's a stream coming behind me. You've gone on, of course, you mentioned your book, Play Big. There's the Gridiron Girls. So you're obviously involved in camps. This is after the Play 60 that you've already talked about. Of course, you're also an author for your children's book series, the Critter Fitters. I mean, obviously you've been busy. How have you done your best to focus your energy in a way to make sure that there's just a crowd of girls behind you that are going to be taking coaching jobs and being involved in the game in a way like they never were before?
It's so funny, right? Because you say like, oh, you went to the biggest stage, and it's like, I think the higher you go, the more you realize how much more work there is to be done. Um, I was like, even when I went to publish Play Big, it got turned down by every publisher. And the response was, women in football doesn't sell. And I was like, well, pretty sure I was the first. So how many times have you tried? Right. But there was still another barrier to be broken, another conversation to be had, another needle to be moved, another door to be opened. And that's what I've seen consistently is we are not yet even close to the point where there aren't still upper level conversations to be had and doors and minds to be opened. So I may not plan for them, right? Like some days I'm like, oh, can't it just be easy? Like, haven't we gotten past this yet? Like, I kind of want to be able to be lazy sometimes. And then I see it and I'm like, ooh, okay, all right. But it is staying with that same mentality of, change is cumulative and it's important, right? Football, the mentality that has driven me from the time I first started playing was football is the final frontier for women in sports. And it was like, if this is the final frontier, then if we can win here, there's nothing that we can't do, right? So you have to have that mindset and the willingness to step up to challenges, even if they're bigger than you ever thought, that you could handle, right? And so for me, that's what I keep doing. And that is like, where do we still need to move the needle? Because football suffers from sins of omission. It's the only sport that doesn't have parity at any level, from peewees to the pros, right? And in those sins of omission, you don't have to tell a girl that she doesn't belong. She sees that in every place that women aren't, in every place that girls aren't. So we have to re-examine society as a whole so that girls are given permission to see themselves in all of those areas, right? And that boys are conditioned to know that, a coach is somebody who can make them better, right? And that it's not a male or a female 100% of the time, right? And that mindset is so important, because the earlier I think that we influence change with both the girls and the boys, right, as they're coming up, the more likely that that change will continue in the sport over the course of lifetimes. And that's why, whether it's designing my girls camp so that the girls get the opportunity to play, and giving women the opportunity to coach at those camps, right? Because that was something that we didn't have the opportunity to do either, right? All of those things are a part of shifting the culture, right? And it goes back to that same mentality of, shifting the culture means that if we can win here, we can do anything, right? And being the first means you cannot be the last, because then you close the door, right? That means you messed up and nobody else is allowed in because you messed it up so bad that no other women are invited to the party. But it also means that girls are given permission to see themselves in every place, in every level, at earlier and earlier ages. And then they'll start doing the work that the boys are doing. They'll start playing the game at the same age and getting the same exposure to knowledge and skill development that the boys are doing. Because for me, I didn't get to play until I was 22 years old. And sometimes I look at the things that I've done and think, gosh, imagine if I would have played earlier, right? Imagine if I would have, the time I had my first love of football, instead of being told what wasn't possible, just was given the ball and was allowed to run. Who knows where I would be today?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And just in the short time since you've made the appearance of women in the NFL, Coach Katie Sowers, of course, has come in. She's rocked the world with the 49ers. Callie Brownson's the chief of staff for the Browns, and of course, Sarah Thomas is a referee at the highest level. So it's happening. It's slowly picking up speed, but there's only one female face in Madden.
Yes. And the beautiful thing is that I have friends of mine whose kids don't know anything about the Cardinals, but they're like, yeah, duh, of course I know her. She's in Madden. And for me, that was another place that we could shift culture.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and it was such a cool opportunity to be able to work with the folks at EA Madden, and they really knew how important it was, right? Like, because I'm kind of like, where is Waldo in this Madden? I'm in both the story mode as a reporter, and then superstar KO mode as a head coach. And I was first cast as the reporter in the gameplay mode, and they were all really excited that I was there, but they felt like it was kind of cheating since I wasn't myself. And so they actually came back with the superstar KO mode and said, can we do this? And I was like, heck yeah, that's super dope. And of course, because I'm a defensive girl, it is team shutdown, best defense in a fast lane. You're kind of going to want that team, because if you get a turnover, you're going to win. And our motto is, if they can't score, they can't win. And so, that they were obviously in my meeting rooms, because that is definitely my mentality.
I love it. Well, Coach, to wrap things up, I have one final question for you. Given everything we've discussed, everything that you've gone through, what's the best piece of advice that you would give today to a young student athlete, boy or girl, that just sees what you've been able to accomplish and is just like, how on earth can I get there too?
One of the things I have really come to is like, let your game speak, right? Let your game speak louder than those who would tell you what's not possible. Let your game speak louder than your haters. Let your game speak louder than your doubters. Because when you're good, they'll want you, right? They'll see you not just as a female coach, but as a coach. They'll see you not just as a female football player, but a baller. And anything that they would use to like say, oh, well, you can't do this because you're short, because X, Y, and Z, whatever those boxes that they try and uncheck in your favor, when your game speaks, someone will listen. And when your game speaks and someone doesn't listen, they're going to forget the fact that they missed your talent because they don't owe you a spot, right? Competition is fierce. So be the fiercest competitor that you can be, because the person who sees you and recognizes you for being different and special will find a place for you.
That's awesome. Awesome way to end it. Well, Dr. Welter, thank you so much for taking the time. And of course, Tyson, who hung up basically the entire time with us as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, Tyson.
He likes the camera.
He does. Tyson, can you wave for everybody? Be like a chihuahua. Maybe that's the advice I should have given. Like, take your inner Tyson and just, play big. Huh?
There we go. We'll end it on that then, because that we're still rolling. So there we go. Two pieces of advice.